Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Kate, I make videos about books and bookish things, and today we wrap up what is a three-part series and that has spanned 3 years. I am going to be tier ranking everything that I read in the final year of my degree. I have literally just completed a Bachelor's of the Arts in English Literature at Durham University. Here's another picture of me graduating, very proud moment, and I looked fantastic in the photos. And so this means that I am finally bringing this series to an end by telling you how good the books that I read in the final year of my degree were. So as per usual, I will just very quickly run you through the modules that I did in the final year of my degree. The way it worked in the third year was that I took 4 modules and that the equivalent of 2 modules were taken up by my dissertation, which was a 10,000 word essay. I did mine on queer poetry, modernist poetry, contemporary poetry, and looking at innovations to poetic form that came about through queer writers' attempt to make queer experience more real. Very proud of it. Got a first on it, which made me incredibly happy. Spent a lot of time on it. So, my modules for my final year were, and I'm going to refer to my little PowerPoint down here, American fiction, post-war fiction and poetry, Restoration and 18th century literature, and contemporary feminist drama, brackets, post-2000. And of course 40 credits worth of my dissertation. So for the purposes of this tier ranking, I will be including the things that I read for my dissertation, even though those weren't like curriculum reading. There was no reading list. I built that up myself along with my dissertation supervisor, so I'm including that stuff, but no one made me read it. This was stuff that I came across of my own volition. And of course the obligatory sentiment that these are all my opinions as I encountered these texts reading them for a degree level course. Don't come at me, I have some controversial opinions in this one for a variety of reasons. So, how does my tier ranking system work? Here is the table that I am using, same as the previous two, and I will very quickly once again run you through what these categories mean. Slayed anyway means that if I'd read this of my own volition, you know, come across it just for fun and read it, I would have loved it anyway. Worth a degree means that I really enjoyed it in its own right, but that I probably wouldn't have had as much to say about it had I not read it for a degree. The vibes are there is stuff that I enjoyed to some extent, even if that extent was that I could poke fun at it or make fun of it. And then we get down to Sorry Who, which is for the text that I don't really remember or am trying to forget about. Then we've got Yikes TM for problematic, unsavoury things that are just kind of, ooh, not great. And then we've got Get in the Bin. I think that's a fairly obvious one. I want these books to die. So without further ado, let's get into the tier ranking. And so I bring to you the very first text that I read in my final year, which was The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. This was a really interesting read, one that I'm glad I came to, and it was surprisingly woke considering when it was written, but I don't really have a huge amount to say about it, nor did I think about it much beyond the lecture itself, so this one gets a Sorry Who. Next, I read The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien, and this is what's going to get me cancelled. I don't really care for Tolkien, unfortunately. I read the first book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and went, yeah, I don't care enough to read the others. I'm so sorry. It was fine. It was really long. Fantasy's a bit hit or miss with me, and this one was a miss. Oh, I don't like the response I'm going to get for putting this as low as I am. I didn't like this more than The Scarlet Letter, so it is also getting a Sorry Who. Don't come for me. Next was Cunto and Othered Poems by Joelle Taylor. This was the first thing that I read for my dissertation and essentially the impetus for me to write the entire thing, and oh my god, it is an incredible collection. Taylor uses this combination of standard form poems as you'd normally recognise them, and poems written in script form, really blending the mediums of play and poetry. It is just absolutely breathtaking, the most gorgeous, heartbreaking subject as well. I cannot speak more highly enough of her writing. It slayed anyway. Next was Malloy by Samuel Beckett. What the fuck was this book? The homeless man does drugs and has sex and may also be the policeman who finds his dead body. I don't know, I can't remember this well enough. I don't care to remember it well enough, but also it was genuinely that confusing in the reading of it. I also thought I'd missed out on all the James Joycean fart and shit stuff, but it was very much back in Beckett's writing. I hated this and I regret that I wasted time reading it. Get in the bin. Revolt, She Said, Revolt Again by Alice Birch. This is bonkers and I adore it. A play where there are no denoted characters in the first act and it is up to the practitioner and the actors to decide how many actors are on stage and who gets which lines. It's really violent feminist content and I really enjoy what it does. This one was well worth the degree. The Provoked Wife is just restoration comedy, so it's just lots of sexist jokes. I really didn't like it, I'm sorry. Yikes, TM, obviously. Okay, The Wives' Excuse, or Cuckolds Make Themselves, is another restoration comedy, but this one is kind of using slut-shaming women as a way to make fun of the men in power who can't divorce their wives who are cheating on them. So, you know, it kind of pulls it back a little bit there. I'm gonna give this one the vibes are there. Next was Moby Dick by Herman Melville, and yes, I read the entirety of Moby Dick, all 800 pages of it, and you know what? It fucking slapped. I really enjoyed it. Were the best parts of it the first and last 100 pages? Yes. Could it therefore have been condensed to maybe a maximum of 300 pages without losing anything? Yes. However, I unequivocally enjoyed this. I can't believe I did, and so unfortunately Moby Dick, despite me thinking I was gonna hate it, gets worth a degree. Next was Kinsey Scale for the Emotionally Fragile Queer by B.B. June. This was some more background reading I did for my dissertation. From a poetical standpoint, it is not the strongest works I read, especially in terms of the quality of stuff I was considering for my dissertation. The writing was just a little simplistic for my tastes, and it wasn't worth using for the dissertation, but it was on the whole quite fun, and I would say very easy poetry to get into, so the vibes are there. Next was The Orphan by Thomas Otway. This is incredibly melodramatic restoration tragedy. Loses some points for the pseudo-incest that goes on, but it's really dramatic, it's very intense, I really like the writing, and so it gets the vibes are there. Bearing in mind the points knocked off for the pseudo-incest. Next was Lucius Junius Brutus by Nathaniel Lee, and this Brutus is by far the more forgettable one in theatrical canon. I did read this, but I remember nothing about it, so sorry who. Next was Lunch Poems by Frank O'Hara, and this is one that I read for my dissertation, and oh my god, I can't believe I used to think that Frank O'Hara's poetry was overrated. His writing is some of the best. I adore it so much, made it into my dissertation, and was probably my favourite chapter of it to write. It slayed anyway, and very specifically, Adieu to Norman, Bonjour to Joan and Jean Paul is one of my favourite poems ever. Please read some Frank O'Hara. Next was Ink Cloud Reader by Kit Fan. Kit Fan came to Durham Book Festival last year, and so this was again more background reading I did for my dissertation. Didn't make it in, so only worth a degree, but some of the poems in there absolutely broke me, and I would highly recommend it as a collection. Next is Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. This is one that I really enjoyed more in retrospect than I did the actual reading of. Really interesting characters. I love sort of genealogical stories that follow the progression of a family over time, but yeah, given I don't really have a huge amount to say on it, it's getting the vibes are there. Next was Trade by Debbie Tucker Green. This is a really interesting play looking at tourism and the ways that women's roles within the tourism industry, specifically around sort of sex work and having sex with men who are on holiday, even not in a sex work context, was super interesting, but not one that gripped me in the same way others on the module did. So this one gets the vibes are there. Next was Maiden by Travis Tate. This was again background reading for my dissertation. Really interesting, sweet poetry reflecting on masculinity, but I will admit it really didn't stick with me, so this one unfortunately gets a sorry who. Next was I Must Be Living Twice by Eileen Myles. This is a collection of pretty much all of their poetry for as long as they've been writing it. They are non-binary, in their 70s, ran for president in the 90s, and just writes these incredible long stanzas on the page. I'm just obsessed with their writing. It gutted me that I couldn't include their poetry in my dissertation. I simply did not have the word count for it. But this absolutely slayed anyway. I would recommend reading Peanut Butter as one of their best poems, and I just love their work. Bright Fear by Mary Jean Chan, again, background reading for my dissertation, again, they read at Durham Book Festival. Ars Poetica made me cry while they were reading it, and then sitting to read through the whole thing again made me cry. Very much worth a degree. Three Sisters by Inua Ellams. This was a reflection on Three Sisters by Chekhov, and this was on my feminist module as the token feminist text by a man. I'm not gonna lie, I really did not get along with this. I didn't enjoy it very much, and I don't think understanding Chekhov's work would have made me appreciate it anymore, so this one is get in the bin. Amorous Nightmares of Delay by Frank O'Hara. People don't know that Frank O'Hara wrote plays, and at the very least scholars of Frank O'Hara don't care that he wrote plays. To be honest, they aren't the best. He was definitely a poet, but this was a really interesting look at the intersections between plays and poems. So the vibes are there, unfortunately, but what a title for a collection of anything. Pamela by Samuel Richardson. This book is low-key horrific and no one seems to appreciate this. I brought this up in a tutorial and was the only one to say, actually, an entire novel of a 15-year-old girl writing letters to her parents while she tries to escape the sexual advances of her boss and essentially being hunted down by him in his house is quite terrifying, actually. It kind of reads more like a thriller than it does a sentimental novel of any kind. I really did not like this. This is beyond a yikes. Next was Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. So, you know, another story of sexual abuse. Non-fiction novels, I've realised, just aren't really my thing. I don't think this is an incredibly powerful story. It is a first-person slave narrative account, so of course it hits hard. So would recommend reading, but very much bear in mind that this is hard stuff to read. Worth a degree, not necessarily a fun read, but a good one. Next was Maryland, and this again comes with so many trigger warnings, but it is one of the most affecting plays I've ever read. It is 19 pages long and was written in the aftermath of the murders of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa, and it is just mind-blowing. One of the best things I think I've ever read, and it haunts me to this day. Very much recommend. We'll try and link below if I can, but yeah, please. It's about rape and murder. It is hard work. It's slayed anyway, but oh my god. Next was Home Fire by Camilla Shamsi, and again, oh my god, this book, I could not stop reading it. This was one where I had to read it for a tutorial, so I would give myself a set amount to get done in a day, but I'd finish dinner and be like, I want to keep reading Home Fire. It is a modern retelling of Antigone, exploring domestic terrorism and borderlands and nationhood, and it is just incredible. The 4th and 5th acts in particular absolutely destroyed me. It slayed anyway. I bought myself a copy after reading it. Next was The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, and like, this is the gothic novel. It is batshit and weird and really, really short, so very easy to get through, and again, pseudo-incest vibes appeared to be a thing in the 18th century, so okay. But yeah, genuinely would recommend if you enjoy gothic writing. The vibes are solidly there. Next was Family Tree by Mojisola Adebayo, and oh my god, what a life-affirming play, considering as well it is about the abuse of black women's bodies and the pursuit of sort of medical research, and then also the reflections of this on the black women who performed so much of the nursing during the COVID pandemic in the UK. It is shockingly gentle for those subjects, and the initial performances of it were in a garden with a real tree. It's absolutely gorgeous. This is so worth a degree. Next is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark, and I have to say, it's an interesting book, but I just do not gel with Muriel Spark's writing in the slightest, so this one unfortunately just gets sorry who. Collective Rage, A Play in 5 Bettys by Jen Silverman. This play changed me on a fundamental level. It is about the community building power of theatre, queer love, platonic love, and what it means to just support people through incredibly difficult times personally and globally. It is gorgeous and hilarious, and I want to watch this and or direct this so badly. It slayed anyway. Please read it, it's just gorgeous. Next, I read Tristram Shandy by Lawrence Stern, and I had an incredible lecture on this and then sat down to read it and went, why am I reading a 600-page autobiography by a character who can't write their own autobiography when he's boring? Get in the bin! Peeling by Kate O'Reilly. This is a fantastic play about the nature of disability support within theatre itself. So interesting, has so much to say about deaf practices, around sign language, around what it means to be a mother when you're disabled. It is genuinely so interesting and made me think a lot about just theatrical practice on the whole, as well as being an interesting text. Very much worth a degree. Small Island by Andrea Levy. If you watched my mid-year freakout tag video, you'll remember I talked about this, but this is an incredibly affecting story following multiple perspectives of a black couple and a white couple in post-war England trying to work out what their country is, essentially. It is so affecting. I was reading it again just for leisure after I'd done my tutorial reading because it's so good. I think about Hortense and Queenie far too much. It slayed anyway. Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. Again, brought this up in the mid-year freakout tag video, but I think about this so much. What if time travel forced you to enable the abuse of your ancestors so that you could be born? What if you thought that you could fix him, but you very much couldn't? It is incredible looks at racism in modern America and America's racial history through this fantastic sci-fi lens of a time travel plot. Slayed anyway. I really want to read more of Butler's writing. Fleabag by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Yes, I studied the play version of Fleabag, and you know what? Considering the topics it handled and the other plays that I looked at on this module, it was by far one of the weakest. I also just don't really find it funny, unfortunately. I think this is probably the text that convinced most people to take FemDram, but I found it by far the most underwhelming of the texts on the module, so get in the bin, I'm afraid. For the same seminar in which we talked about Fleabag was We Want You to Watch by Alice Birch and Rashdash, and considering the absolute horrors with which Maryland dealt with porn and rape and sexual fantasy and women's, place in society with this, I found We Want You to Watch was just way more gauche about the whole thing and didn't handle it nearly as well, so this one gets a sorry who. Mies Julie by Yael Farber. This was based on a play by Strindberg called Miss Julie. I also hadn't heard of that before the module, and it took a really, really basic story about, women going too far with sexual empowerment and turned it into the most complicated discussion of privilege politics when you have a black man raping an upper-class white woman in order to escape servitude. Who's winning? Where does the privilege lie? Who is actually committing an act of violence against who? It was so complicated and thought-provoking, but not really one I enjoyed reading because of the nature of the subject. So the vibes are there, but I did enjoy getting to make a presentation about this. White Noise by Don DeLillo. This is one of those incredibly strange novels that essentially looks at the idea that America has no identity besides capitalism. It was just bizarre. Reading it was interesting, but I don't think I really got much out of it, so sorry who. The Writer by Ella Hickson. This is an incredible piece of sort of meta-theatrical theatre writing which looks at the role of women in theatre and the ability to even write feminist theatre on the whole. The opening act in which an audience member talks to a man who works in the theatre actually made me gasp out loud while reading it, so truly incredible, worth a degree, and I think about this quite a lot. Orinoco by Afra Ben. Afra Ben is a truly incredible writer and I was glad to encounter more of her writing, but this is a white woman's narrative about a black African prince who's not like other black African princes, so you can imagine the kinds of compliments he's paid, so yeah, I think you can understand why this is getting a yikes. Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. What the fuck was this book? I thought I knew what this was going into it. I knew about the Lilliputians. But the horse people, I genuinely lost my mind reading this. I was reading this in the lead up to exam period, being like, oh yeah, this is a text I kind of know a bit about already. This will be very easy for me to revise ahead of exams. I was sat there texting my friends with like every new page going, it's gotten worse. The horse people want to have sex with him now. So yeah, I just can't believe that no one addresses how insane this is and is like, yeah, kids book, So yeah, lost my mind. The vibes are there though, because I sure did have fun talking about it, but like, what the fuck was that? Next, Evelina by Fanny Burney. I adore this. As I said in my mid-year freakout tag video, highly recommend for fans of Jane Austen. It's social commentary, it's comedy, it's looking at what if the most perfect girl ever turns out she was from an upper class family, and also she has a love interest to rival Mr. Knightley in Emma. So I really, really enjoyed this. Will happily read it again. It's slayed anyway. I want there to be fan fiction for this. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I was really looking forward to reading this because I've been a Sylvia Plath fan for ages, but it turns out I've grown up beyond her. I'm not as sad as I used to be, and so I could appreciate the writing. I think it's incredibly constructed, but I just didn't really vibe with it that much. I much prefer life-affirming literature these days, so worth a degree, very glad to have read it, but yeah, I've grown out of Sylvia Plath and that is good personal development. Where I'm Calling From, which is a short story collection by Raymond Carver. This was a phenomenal lecture, and then I sat down to read as many of these stories as I could before exams, and not gonna lie, this was not one of those short story collections where one of them just irrevocably changes your brain chemistry, so unfortunately this one gets a sorry who, and maybe I'll return to it at some point to read more. However, a short story collection that did break my brain was Close Range by Annie Proulx, and yes, one of the stories I read in it was Brokeback Mountain. Again, didn't read the entire thing, but the stories that I did read, devastating, incredible, so interesting, and I very much want to go read more of them. This absolutely gets well worth a degree. And finally, I can't believe that the last thing I read for my degree was The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard. This is interesting dystopian sci-fi, except it is so rooted in the sexism and the racism of the 1960s that you really can't get away from the time in which it was written. I just absolutely cannot get over that the one woman in the book, the one woman who is also a doctor alongside all of her colleagues, gets referred to as Little Miss and Ma'am, when the others are getting, oh yes, you're right, Doctor. It was interesting. I would love to read fanfiction or essays about this, or just some sort of adaptation or riffing on this book, but I could not get over the sexism and racism, so this one's a yikes, obviously. Fuck you, J.G. Ballard. Last two texts, however, these are two I could not place chronologically. Everything else I've said in the order in which I read it, but these are two that I can't remember exactly where these fit in. One of those being the Kenning Anthology of Poets Theatre. This is some real nerd stuff. I read it for my dissertation. It is just a collection of plays written by poets in like the mid-century time period. Incredibly nerdy, worth a degree. Like, I found it really interesting, but not one I'd necessarily recommend unless you're into niche poetic theatre like I am. And Tender Buttons by Gertrude Stein. This was the new text that I read for my dissertation because I also included Dr. Faustus Lights the Lights, but this is where I got her poetry from. Her writing is so difficult and it's such hard work, and yet that is why it is so good. I enjoy the work it takes to understand her writing. Slayed anyway. I adore her. So there we go. That is everything I read for the final year of my degree, and here is the final table. So that is what I enjoyed most of my degree. Final thoughts on this. You can tell I did my dissertation on the right thing. I loved the poetry that I read for it. Even the stuff I just read as sort of background writing, you know, filling in gaps in my knowledge and checking that I had a good measure of the time periods I was writing on, were just spectacular. And yeah, I think it shows that this was the right pick of a dissertation for me. However, contemporary feminist drama was probably the most valuable module I did, considering again how highly I was ranking these plays and generally how much thought all of them were giving me. I have finished my degree now. It is so weird to think about the fact that I will not be reading any more things for my degree, and that therefore that is this done. I'm very tempted though to revisit my reading lists from first, second and third year and pick up any of the stuff I didn't get to reading at the time at which I was meant to read it. So who knows, maybe I'll have a recapping the stuff that I'd sort of slept on while I was a student video at some point, but yeah, this means though that I can tally up the total number of texts that I read for my degree and tell you exactly how many texts I read for my English degree. So, got the numbers on my screen down here. In third year, I read 46 texts, in second year, I read 39, and in first year, I read 43, which means over the course of my degree, I read 128 books, plays, poetry collections, short story collections, and oh my god, that is a lot of reading, but I don't regret it for a second. I think it is very apparent in all the content I've made about my degree, about doing an English degree, that this was the right choice for me. I've loved it so much. It has broadened my knowledge of and my love of books so much, and I love the nerd it has made me. I love my ability now to talk about backgrounds to English literature, to look at the ways movements developed, to compare writers to one another, and yeah, it's shown me things that I would never have found of my own volition, so I'm a happy girl, and I'm very glad I'm going into the world of work with this being what I am an expert in, because as everyone knows, English degrees are so valuable in the job market. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was entertaining to you, and please give this video a like if you did indeed like it. As always, comment down below your thoughts on any of these books. It's been very fun to run this by my friends and see their opinions, because as you can tell with things like my comments on Tolkien, I've warranted some strong opinions in the past. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on any of these books, if you think I got it wrong, if I got it very right, if I've got you to check out new things as a result of this. Have a chat to me. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe so you can see when I upload more bookish content, and yeah, I will see you next time.